We want consistently good mixes. And to get truly consistent mixes, we need to control all the elements of the mix. One thing that can always change is the mixer, but we can at least keep our effects and processing exactly the same from show to show. And we do this by using plugins on our laptop. Using external plugins can seem intimidating, but I'll take you through step by step what software you need and how to set it up. We'll cover how to send to effects like reverb and delay, and we'll also cover using inserts like multiband compression and de-essers. If you need a quick primer on EQ, then grab my free EQ guide, 3 Steps to Perfect EQ. I will leave a link to that in the description below this video. Let's dive in. Obviously, first of all, we're going to need a mixer, right? It doesn't matter what kind of mixer, analog, digital, whatever, you just need a mixer. Then we need a way to get the sound out of the mixer and into the laptop, and vice versa, out of the laptop and into the mixer. This could be a USB card mounted in a digital mixer, could be a Dante card using Dante Virtual Sound Card with your laptop, or it could be a sound card. I'm just using a Focusrite sound card here and the auxiliary inputs and outputs on the back of the mixer to keep it simple and show you the workflow. Second of all, we need software to run our plugins on. I'm using Live Professor, but you could use Wave Super Rack, or there's probably other software solutions out there. What we need to do now is just configure the software to recognize our sound card. So we open up options at the top and then go into audio MIDI options. I'm going to select my device type as ASIO and my device as the Focusrite USB ASIO. If you were on Mac, you would just select your Focusrite USB. If you're using the USB on the mixer, you would just pick your mixer, assuming you've got the drivers. If you're using Dante, you would just select Dante Virtual Sound Card. I've made videos on these, so I'll leave links to them down below or up in this video here. The next thing we want to do is we want to double check our sample rate and our buffer size. So buffer size directly affects the latency, and you can see that I've got just a little over 10 milliseconds of latency here. Generally speaking, you'll get away with about 10 milliseconds for front of house processing, but you want it to be a good deal shorter, maybe 5 milliseconds if you're using processing on monitor channels. I'm at 10.58, that's a little high, so I'm going to bring the buffer size down until I get my latency under 10 milliseconds. Of course, the lower the buffer size, the harder your CPU has to work, so you need a more powerful computer to get lower latencies. Once that's all set up, we are ready to go. Next up, we click this plus icon here to create a new chain. Again, it's a similar thing in Waves. They use racks, and it's just a place where you can load your plugins. So I'll just click plus here. I'm going to name it reverb, and I'm going to set the input to be mono and the output to be stereo, because I'm going to use this for a send and return type effect. Once I've set that up, I need to configure the inputs and the outputs into that particular chain of plugins. So on the inputs, I'm going to select input 1 and set it to Focusrite input 1, so that is input 1 on my Focusrite card, rather obviously. And then I'm going to set my outputs to be outputs 1 and 2 on the back of my Focusrite. Now I'm ready to connect up my card to the mixer. So I will use auxiliary output 1 to send from the mixer into my plugins. I'll take a cable and I'll connect aux output 1 to input 1 on my Focusrite. I'm then going to connect the outputs 1 and 2 from my Focusrite into auxiliary input 1 and 2 on the back of this mixer. So that's me sending out of auxiliary output 1 and returning on auxiliary input 1 and 2. After I've done that, I can click the plus icon here and I can pick an effect. So I'm going to pick a reverb. I'll just search up here for reverbs, pick one that I like, and you'll see it loads in here. And then I can change the parameters. But let's look at the mixer, configure that, and then test that we've got input and output. So let's set up a simple send return effect. So that's a bit like a reverb, right? You send into the reverb unit on your mixer, like here, and then it is returned onto your effects return channels, which you then send to front of house, right? To the speakers. We're going to do the exact same thing, except we're going to send it into our computer, and then we're going to return it on some additional channels, some auxiliary return channels. Now, it doesn't matter what mixer you're using, the process is exactly the same, right? You're going to pick a bus, which is going to be your effects bus. I've picked bus 5. It's my first available bus. We're going to make sure that our bus is set as a post fader send to that bus, right? Because that's how we like to do send return effects usually, post fader. I'm going to just double check that. Going to make sure that my channel sends are set to post fader. Lovely. Everything's good for me on this mixer now. The next thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that this bus comes out of the output that we previously chose on the back of the mixer, right? I chose auxiliary out 1. It doesn't matter. Maybe you've got a mixer without auxiliary outs. Maybe you only have XLR outputs and they're called 1, 2, 3, 4. You need to make sure that this bus that you have picked to be your effects bus is going to come out of and output on the back of this mixer, and that's what you're connecting into your sound card, your Focusrite. So I'll head to my routing screen, you'll head to your routing screen, your I/O screen, whatever, and then you find your bus and you make sure that it's set to come out of the output that you want. I'm using auxiliary 1. The next thing we'll do is we'll set up a stereo return, right? I'm gonna head to my auxiliary channels because on this mixer I have auxiliary channels. You might have effects return channels that you can use. You might have just input channels that you can use. It doesn't matter. Find a couple of channels you can use as a return. I'm gonna select this and I'm going to make sure that my bus, my channel is linked so that these two faders down here come up and down together. So what I've done now is this bus 5 is now my reverb send, and auxiliary 1 and 2 are my reverb returns, right? And when I want to send my vocal into the reverb, so what I do is I get my microphone, right? Here's my microphone channel here. I'll gain it up as normal, 222. You see that I've got signal in this channel here. And then I'll turn it up, bring it in front of house. Great. And then I will, as normal, as if I was going to send to an effect, select my bus, use sends on fader. You know, you can use dials if you have them available, if that's how you like to work. And then I make sure that I'm sending my vocal into this bus. Now you can see that it's in this bus. And if we look over at our live processor or Waves Rack or whatever you're using, you see that my vocal is coming into this input, it's going to this reverb, and then it's coming out of the output. We configured the input and the output over here earlier. So if I go back over here to my auxiliary returns, you see here that the reverb is returning. So now if I bring my vocal into the PA and I bring up my return, maybe you can hear that, maybe you can't hear that, but I've got a nice reverb here. Just mute it. And now I can use the same reverb preset, exact same reverb on every single show that I go to. And that can be delay. And you can also create a chain here, right? So it goes reverb into delay, however you want. But what if we want to use a compressor or an EQ, dynamic EQ, de-esser, something like that? We want to set it up differently then. We want to set it up as an insert. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna turn this off for now, and I'm gonna create a new chain, right? I'm gonna call this my vocal insert, right? And it's just gonna be mono and mono, right? Because we're gonna be sending one mono channel out and returning the mono channel back in again. And then we pick the effects that we want to use here, right? So let's say that I want to have a multi-band compressor. So I'll pick my multi-band compressor. You see I've got that in here, right? As we did before, we need to configure the inputs and the outputs. So I'm gonna click here, my vocal insert. I'm gonna click is going to be, again, input 1 on my Focusrite, and my output is going to be output 1 on my Focusrite. Now it's worth saying you can't use these two techniques simultaneously if you only have 2 input nodes, right? So now we need to set up our mixer, right? Still got my vocal microphone here. I'm gonna head back to my inputs. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm going to select the channel, and then you need to set the insert, send, and return points for this channel here, the channel that you're using. And that is going to vary mixer to mixer. On this mixer, what I do is I select home, and then I go over to config, and in here you see here's my insert. On Yamaha mixers, there's a little button that says insert point. It's going to be different every mixer. I suggest that you look up the manual. I can't tell you how to do it on every single mixer, but I do have a video showing you how to do it on this mixer. At any rate, what we can do is we can set the insert point for this mixer to be auxiliary 1, which is currently sending out to our Focusrite. So I'm going to do that. And there's a button down here that allows me to activate the insert. You can also choose your insert. Again, different on every mixer, but fairly normal that you have to pick the output, that is the physical output on the back of the mixer that you want to send the channel out of. And then you have to pick the return point, that is the physical input on the back of the mixer that you want to return the process signal to. And then you have to click insert to start this process. So there's one last thing I need to do on this mixer, and that is I need to go to my routing screen, to my auxiliary, and I need to change it from being a mix bus to being an insert. I think that's pretty specific to this mixer, but again, every mixer is going to be different. Let me know if there's a particular mixer that you would like me to demonstrate the insert point routing on, and I can definitely do that. So now we have the input and the output coming in on this channel here. You won't be able to hear it, but you can see that when I speak, if I do S's, my multi-band is going up here. If I go, then you see that it's moving down here. So now we have a multi-band compressor, and we could add whatever we wanted in here, you know, like maybe we're looking for a de-esser. Maybe we're looking for a de-esser, right? And we're gonna chuck a de-esser in. So what's important to remember is that the microphone is coming from the microphone, right? It's going into my mixer. It's being sent out of an auxiliary return on the back of this mixer. It's coming into my Focusrite, which is then connected to the computer, and then coming back out of the Focusrite, returning on the auxiliary channel which has now been routed directly as an insert back into our main channel. I've used this Focusrite sound card, but there are of course other ways that you can connect your laptop to your mixer. You could use Dante, you could use the sound card, and I've got videos showing you how you can connect these systems up to your mixer anyway if you want to get started that way. Of course, you don't need to use Live Professor. You could use Waves Soundrack Performer, or there's probably some kind of other solutions. I don't know them all, but the workflow remains the same no matter what mixer you're using or what protocol you use to move the audio from your mixer to the laptop and back again. Due to the input and output limitations of the Focusrite, I couldn't use the send return and the insert at the same time, but you can. If you use Dante or a USB card or even a larger interface, you could have multiple inserts and effect returns going at the same time. But it all depends on the processing power of your computer. Let me know what plugins you would like to use to keep your shows consistent. And let me know if this was helpful. Leave a comment if it was too confusing or if you need me to simplify something, and I'll have another go or I'll try and explain it in the comments. I'll leave some videos up here about connecting stuff together using Dante or using the USB card on the X32 and M32 mixers. As always, subscribe to the channel if it was helpful and you want to see more of this. Until next time, goodbye.